I've upgraded Shadowcaster from a set of presets to a script that you can download for free down in the description. Shadowcaster allows you to create natural looking shadows on any layer in After Effects extremely easily. And now that it's a fully featured script instead of just presets, it's much easier to control and manipulate throughout your entire composition. Let me show you exactly how it works. Here I have a variety of different layer types. You just select the layer you want to apply it to. This one is a shape layer, and click the first button, Apply Shadowcaster, and that's going to apply all the effects, including a custom pseudo effect controller that drives the entire rig, and you can immediately see the soft shadows coming off of the logo. So if I go into my shadow controls, this is where you'll find all of the familiar drop shadow style controls that you're used to, as well as some additional controls. So let me increase the distance a little bit and skip down to falloff, because this is one of the features that drop shadow does not have. This is going to dynamically adjust the opacity of each instance of the drop shadows that are applied after it in order to give you this softer falloff. Same thing goes for spread. If I increase this value to a higher number, the further away the shadow is from that object, the softer it becomes. So those are two custom controls that Shadowcaster offers that the default drop shadow effect doesn't give you. Now there are more controls in there and we'll come back to them in a minute. But let's just grab all of our other layers and I'll show you that if I click that button with all three selected, it's going to apply it to all three other layer types and they all respond in exactly the same way. The problem is adjusting all of these shadows individually is time consuming, which is why we have this second button, Create Global Controls Null. Now with nothing selected, clicking this button is going to automatically identify any of the layers in your comp that have Shadowcaster applied and automatically link them to this null object. You see that we have another custom set of controls here, Shadowcaster Global Controls. And if I expand this list, it also has those same shadow controls, but they're now going to control every instance of Shadowcaster within your composition. So I can update everything at once, which makes editing these shadows so much easier. Now, maybe I want to make this shadow color something other than black. I'll grab the eyedropper, choose the background color, and then just make it a darker, more saturated shadow color. And now that blends into the background a little bit better than black. But let's zoom in on my logo over here and you'll notice that we're getting this segmentation of the shadows as they spread across the logo. Since there's thinner lines here and not such solid shapes, we're seeing that separation much more clearly, but you can even see it here on the solid square. To counteract that, we just need to duplicate the number of drop shadows within each layer's effect stack, but you don't have to do that manually anymore. There's a button down here to increase or decrease the shadow samples throughout the composition. If you only have one layer selected, it's only going to apply it to that layer. So if I click plus now, you see that that instantly increases the quality of the shadow for my logo. And I could do the same thing over here with just the square. But if I press the minus button a couple times or just undo back to where all of these layers had the same number of shadows, I can also increase the samples globally by deselecting everything and then clicking that plus button. Again, that just increases all of the samples or decreases them at the same time for any layers using Shadowcaster. And there are tooltips underneath all of these buttons that explain this behavior. So if you only had specific Shadowcaster layers selected, it will affect those. If you have no layers selected, it affects all Shadowcaster layers. In addition to the shadows though, Shadowcaster also has a bevel option. So if I enable bevel underneath the global controls, it enables it for every layer. And we're gonna notice it most on this layer of the After Effects logo because it has this darker shadow. Now it's very thin to start. So if I increase it a bit, you're gonna notice that much more. But a bevel can really add a lot of depth to an otherwise flat graphic. You don't wanna go heavy-handed with this. Subtlety is key here, but you have the ability to change the thickness and the intensity of that bevel. And it reacts to the angle of the light. So if I change my shadow's direction, you'll notice that the bevel highlight is following that light source to further sell the depth of these layers. And these same controls exist on the individual level. You would just need to disable the global control layer by setting it to none if you wanted to independently adjust this layer outside of the global controller. But let's say that you're happy with the settings that you have applied to these 4 layers and you want to remove that global controller altogether. Well, with it selected, if I hover over that joystick icon, I can hold the Alt or Option button on a Mac and click on it and it will just completely remove it and it reverts back to the local settings. But what if you wanted to keep those shadow settings? I'll undo back to where we had the global controller, and that's what these buttons here are for. The first one is Push to Global, meaning if I have a layer selected and I like the settings that I have here, I could push those settings to the global controller. controller, but the button right next to it allows me to pull those settings from the global controllers to the selected layers. Or again, if I have nothing selected and I click, it's going to apply it to all Shadowcaster layers. Now, if I Alt-Option click on that joystick and it removes the global controller, all of those Shadowcaster settings from the global controller are preserved on the local copies. So that's just another feature of the script that makes working with Shadowcaster so much faster. I'll undo to get back to where we were with that global controller, and we'll take a look at the third button over here, which is create a light source layer. And what this does is creates a shape layer with a gradient that fades out from white to black and sets the blend mode to add, as well as it gives us some controls for how this light layer looks. So we can change its size, we can change its color, if we wanted to be maybe a little bit warmer. You don't have to worry about the tint effect, it's being controlled by this custom pseudo effect, and we can even turn down that opacity if maybe we don't want it to be such a bright light source. But because I had a global controller in my scene, it automatically parented it to that global controller, meaning I can move this layer around to move the light source. But to get the shadows to react to that light source and be more convincing, all you need to do is check on Use as Light Source on that global controller. So if I check this on, now all of those shadows are going to respond to the position of that null object within the scene. And since we combined that with the light source, it's actually pretty convincing. I'm gonna make it really big so we don't see the boundaries of it. And then I can move this around however I want to cast those shadows in any direction. Now, depending on how far away your null object is from a specific layer and how many samples you have, you might see some of that separation showing up. So just be aware of that, but that's why we have this distance offset slider. If I drag this to a negative value, it's essentially going to pull the casting of that shadow, the depth of that shadow, further back. And if it's still not solving the issue for you, you can always go into the specific layer, into the shadow controls, and this setting right here, distance offset global only, is the same slider but just for that layer, and it only works when using a global control layer. So I can back this up even further just for my logo. And this is essentially creating how much extrusion or how far away from that background layer each one of these Shadowcaster layers is. So lots of little ways to customize how everything interacts with each other using the Shadowcaster controls. And just like removing the global controller, we can remove the global light the same way. Hold down Alt-Option and click on that button and it removes the light source altogether. I'll do the same thing for the global controller, Alt-Option click, and I want to point out one more thing. There's a little bit of crazy math expressions going on in the background to determine whether or not the layer Shadowcaster is applied to is vector or raster. So these two layers are both vector, shape, and text. These two are both raster, solid, and Illustrator artwork, unless I enable the continuously rasterize switch. But there needs to be a check for that because the way that these shadows are calculated is affected by those two settings, either vector or raster. So if you ever apply Shadowcaster to a layer and it's not looking the way that you expect it to, head into the admin section here and find this C value and just right click on it and say reset. That's gonna move that value to the center of the layer, and as long as it's right in the center of that layer, it should be able to calculate and tell if it's vector or raster. But that very rarely ever happens. As long as it's all set up properly, then you can do things like rotate your layer and the shadows are not going to rotate with it, or scale the layer up and the shadows are going to remain the same distance from that layer's center point. It's a pretty sophisticated setup in the background with all the expressions, but it feels very natural as you use it. And if you ever have trouble remembering how all of this works together, remember there are tooltips under every button, as well as this help button that gives you a pretty great overview of all of the features. You can even go to the website specifically to read the user guide. But I do want to point out that Shadowcaster works great with other tools, like CodeRunner, which is another free script that you can use to create your own buttons that execute things like other scripts, apply expressions or presets, and organize it however you would like. So if you click the Shadowcaster button, that's just going to pop up the Shadowcaster menu and allow you to quickly change whatever settings you want to do and then close the menu again. I've also set this up to work as a K-bar toolbar with all of the functionality split out with custom icons. All of this comes in the same download. You can get it for free down in the description. If you want to use the K-bar toolbar, you'll see that there's a .kbar file. You just need to go into your K-bar settings, click on this menu and say import from kbar file, navigate to that .kbar file, and it will automatically import all of these buttons set up and ready to go, complete with modifier keys, and all of the tooltips tell you exactly how those work. But that's it for Shadowcaster. I hope you enjoy this script. If you use it, please tag me online at JakeInMotion. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one.